And now it's time for development debates. We dig deeper into some of the questions shaping the two Chinese experts. Today, we'll hear the views of two Chinese experts debating if China's GDP growth this year is good enough. China's National Bureau of Statistics recently announced the country's GDP in 2013 saw a 7.7% increase. It reached $9.4 trillion, equaling the growth rate for 2012. This continued increase is a pointed challenge to several doom-mongering economists who had predicted that China's economy may soon start declining. Moreover, after a series of measures to deleverage and rebalance the country's economy, it's believed that China's GDP will continue to grow at a steady 7 or 8% for the next few years. At a recent press conference, Director General of the MBS, Ma Jiantang, was upbeat about the news. He said that 7.7% increase has exceeded the government's goal of 7.5% growth issued earlier last year. Chinese economics expert Professor Yao Shujie from the University of Nottingham shared this positivity surrounding the latest GDP figures. He was referring to the country's energy consumption to validate his argument. According to research from Xiamen University's Professor Lin Boqiang, China's GDP growth rate over the last 3 decades has always been proportional to its electricity consumption. In other words, a country's economy will have positive growth if its electricity consumption grows at a higher rate than its GDP. Last year, China's electricity consumption increased by 7.5% compared with the previous year, representing an annual growth rate of almost identical to that of GDP. Yao believes that China's economy would become more efficient if it were mainly driven by the service industry, rather than the manufacturing industry. In fact, for the first time last year, China's service industry contributed more to the country's GDP than the manufacturing industry did at 46%. That's a 3% growth from 2010. Last year, the increase in electricity consumption from China's service industry was 10.3%, which is 3% higher than that of the manufacturing industry. Yao says that usually the development of a service industry best reflects the country's competitiveness, and that consequently China's economic development is on the right track. However, financial commentator Qiu Lin has rejected Yao's idea. He was explaining in his blog that there are still some problems behind these figures, such as a slow increase of Chinese people's disposable incomes. But this assertion is not corroborated by official figures. Last year, they saw Chinese people's GDP per capita increase by 7.1%. That's almost identical to the 7% rise in people's disposable incomes. Additionally, the data also indicates that last year, people's disposable incomes represented 64% of GDP per capita, a 0.45% rise in the previous year. However, Qiu points out that even though disposable incomes grew last year, it was down from the 9.6% growth in 2012, so it actually represented the lowest year-on-year increase since the year 2000. Qiu believes that the high GDP growth rate would be rendered meaningless if ordinary people's incomes don't rise. In fact, many Chinese people nowadays prefer to ignore China's GDP growth figures. This is because they themselves don't feel any benefit from the rapid economic development. Qiu therefore hopes that the drop in last year's GDP growth rate might help the government reconsider the balance between social and personal wealth. With China now over halfway through its latest national 5-year plan, the country appears to have no problem hitting its intended target of 7% annual average growth. Meanwhile, the government has also announced ambitious plans to double people's income by 2020. However, it may struggle to achieve that goal if it simultaneously allows a rapid increase in GDP but a slow growth in personal wealth.